faces. My name is Brian Campbell, so I've met lots of you, but I'm relatively new at Central as the Director of Sustainability Education. And I'm thrilled to have so many folks out for the first in what is a series of speakers this semester. We're going to all talk in some way or another about energy and the environment and help us think broadly about where we are as a country and as a world, both in terms of the environment, but also economic and social sorts of issues and how those are all wrapped up together. So tonight is Taylor Brorby, and just for future reference for you, so in March we have Tim Dwight who's going to be here. So he's a solar entrepreneur. He'll be speaking a little bit about alternative energy in Iowa. In April, Rick Bass will be here. He's another writer who writes a lot about the environment and has done a lot of activism around climate change and other environmental issues. So lots of exciting things to look forward to. I also was just going to give a little plug. So for those of you who are part of the Central community every day, students and faculty and staff, on Monday we kick off the reusable cup campaign. There's a lot of buzz building about. So Monday afternoon in Maytag, you can either buy a cup if you don't have one yet, or come and get a card that you can get punched every time you use a reusable cup and spread to the market. Fun prizes and fun things around that over the coming weeks and months. So, Monday afternoon here, Tuesday in Central, selling cups, and then they'll go for sale in the market and in Fred's and in the cafe. So tonight, we're excited to welcome Taylor Brorby. Taylor is a writer originally from western North Dakota and spent 4 months living there in the past year, talking with folks and thinking and writing about the social, economic, and environmental impacts of the Bakken oil boom. He's currently at Iowa State University, where he's teaching and pursuing an MFA in creative writing and the environment. He's written about these issues in a number of publications, in the Huffington Post, Orion Magazine, High Country News, lots and lots more. Taylor's currently working on writing Vespers 2014, a Vespers for Climate Change, and a poetry collection related to the Bakken oil boom. He's also editing an anthology of creative writing about fracking. So we're really thrilled to have him here to share with us, give us some context about what fracking looks like on the ground in North Dakota and from outer space as well. And to just give us some way of thinking about what this looks like for real people and real places, especially as we look forward to this ongoing conversation over the next several weeks about fracking and energy and environment. So, welcome to it.
So I think I have a mic turned on. You can hear me? Great. Before we steer away from technology, I'm sort of low tech, I wanted to give you two images here. So this is the country at night. We have Florida down here. We have Chicago here. We have Minneapolis here. What city is this? Anyone with a potential guess? Maybe it's not a city, and those of you who are thinking that would be correct. I've had students say, oh, that's Calgary, and I go, well, Calgary, that would be pretty far south. This is actually western North Dakota. And compared to Minneapolis, Chicago, and the seaboard, this is not city-like pollution. This is actually the flaring of natural gas here. Perhaps the planet's largest bonfire that you can see from outer space. So there's an image to stick in your mind throughout tonight's talk. And then here, this is actually a fairly outdated map at this point. This is created by Gage Cartographics out of Bozeman, Montana. They were commissioned to create a map that reflects the oil, saltwater, and whatever other means, spills in North Dakota. When this was created, at the time there were about 7,200 oil spills. Since that time there are over 9,000, and these are reported. So these are ones that companies report that have spilled in the area. Estimates are several thousand times more. The handy thing about this is you can hover over it and it tells you the amount spilled and what it was. So 42 is a popular number, 126 gallons to 110. The nation's largest inland oil spill is right here. It didn't make the cover of the New York Times when it happened or anything. 865,200 gallons, to give you an idea of how large that is. That's about 7 football fields is how large that oil spill is. Just a few weeks ago, a saltwater spill happened a little bit north of Williston here. A previous saltwater spill record happened this past July. It was 1 million gallons and spilled into the Native American reservation right around here. It spilled into the bay on Lake Sakakawea where they get their drinking water, so they didn't have access to drinking water. That was 1 million gallons. Just a few weeks ago, north of Williston, 3 million gallons of saltwater spilled, which for those of you who are in the sciences or chemistry know that saltwater renders cropland sterile. So 3 million gallons is quite a bit of liquid. So I'll leave this up there while I go through my little talk. It's sort of 3 constructed essays. So for those of you who are expecting a PowerPoint, I'm sorry to disappoint you. You can consider it like an NPR podcast or something. So we'll go on our little harbor cruise throughout the Bakken. Black Mountain is not found on any map. In Dawson County, Montana, Black Mountain receives dozens of semis hauling waste from the North Dakota oil boom each day. Surrounded by a sea of blonde prairie grass and sage, Black Mountain stands in stark contrast to the surrounding geography. Where western meadowlarks sit on barbed wire fences, Black Mountain stands as a sordid reminder of the ecological implications of the Bakken oil boom. Developed in 2013, Black Mountain, as it's called among locals, is a 23.1 acre landfill that accepts solid waste from the production of oil and natural gas in North Dakota. Other items this landfill accepts include sludge, filter socks, and drill cuttings. The landfill is owned by Ross Oakland, a farmer, and is known as Oaks Disposal Services. The Western Organization of Resource Council, also known as WORK, their 2013 report watered down oil and gas waste production oversight in the West, states that Oakland received a permit from the Montana Department of Environmental Quality for a 130-acre landfill. The expected lifespan of this landfill is 14 years, with the capacity to hold 2 million tons of waste. Black Mountain, as the work report confirms, sits 15 feet above an aquifer that extends under the city of Glendive, Montana, and the Yellowstone River. The Yellowstone River, which meets the Missouri River in North Dakota, eventually flow and create the western border of Iowa and meet with the Mississippi River and on into the Gulf of Mexico. The aquifer under Black Mountain feeds the Yellowstone River some 20 miles away and is a source for both irrigation and drinking water. The aquifer under Black Mountain is not the only water source under threat from this massive landfill. Black Mountain is on top of a hill with 3 creeks flowing around the black-rimmed landfill, the North, Middle, and South Fork Deer Creeks, all of which empty into the Yellowstone River watershed. Over the course of the past year, Ross Oakland has given money to the local community. As the Dawson County Fair Facebook page reported on February 11, 2014, quote, "How do you make a fair manager cry instantaneously? Tell her you're tired of negative people and want to do something positive for your community, and you appreciate the positive direction the fair board is going, then hand her a personal check for $50,000 toward new restrooms. All caps Ross and all caps Tara Oakland are heroes. We're now 2/3 of our way to our funding goal without even going to the bank. If you see these two, give them an attaboy, and then let's pray for new bathrooms by fair time, end quote. In addition to the $50,000 for the new restrooms, Ross and his wife have donated some $1.5 million to install new turf at the Dawson County football field. Ross has effectively bought the community's opinion of Black Mountain, silencing any dissenting viewpoints. Where neighbors were previously concerned a few years ago about their health due to Black Mountain, they're now largely silent. Prairie fires and lightning strikes are common during the summer months in eastern Montana. What does it mean to have a hill crammed with 2 million tons of radioactive waste sitting in the open? What does it mean that Black Mountain is lined with only 2 plastic tarps able to withstand the cold only to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, with yearly reports of negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit in winter? What happens when these tarps undoubtedly crack and start leaking radioactive material into the longest undammed river in the country? Over the next several decades, we're sure to find out. Last spring, an oil well near the confluence of the Yellowstone, Missouri rivers was overtaken due to flooding. The ice jam Missouri River flooded, and a well owned by Savannah, a Denver-based company, spewed 1,400 gallons of oil into the Missouri. And just last month, a pipeline under the Yellowstone River burst, spewing over 50,000 gallons of toxic oil into the river. The city of Glendive advised its residents to not drink from their taps, since the oil contained a known cancer-causing agent, benzene. Oil has been traced as far downstream as Williston, North Dakota, over 100 miles downstream from Glendive. In the Bakken, oil spills, brine spills, and chemical spills do not happen only because of flooding. Mismanagement, intentional disposal, and drainage ditches and fields, as well as unexpected pipeline malfunctions, contribute to the over 9,000 reported oil spills that have occurred in western North Dakota in the last 8 years. On March 20th, 2014, a pipeline near Alexander, North Dakota burst, sending 34,000 gallons of sweet Bakken crude across fields and ditches. The cleanup required over 225 trucks to haul away the oil-coated soil, which the North Dakota Quality Director, Dennis Fulis, says is largely cleaned up. 34,000 gallons is a lot of liquid. It's about 1.5 times the size of the pool you grew up with in your childhood, the one that's 4 feet deep at one end, gently sloping to 8 at the other, and is 21 feet long. The spill near Alexander remained largely unreported, never making the headlines of any national paper. Another spill, the nation's largest inland oil spill, never received coverage in the New York Times or major publications until I wrote about it in the Huffington Post. Over 20,600 barrels, or more than 865,000 gallons, the size of 7 football fields, of oil oozed onto Steve Jensen's farm. Jensen discovered the leak on September 29, 2013. The state took more than 11 days to tell the public about the oil spill, and Governor Jack Dalrymple was supposedly notified on October 9th, 1 day before the public. Just a few weeks ago, days after the reported oil spill in the Yellowstone River, another pipeline burst near Williston, North Dakota, leaking over 3 million gallons of salt water across cropland and into a tributary of the Missouri River. The saltwater spill eventually entered that river. Pipelines do not guarantee safe travel of oil, but neither do trains. Last July, a train carrying Bakken oil derailed in July of 2013. A train derailed in Quebec, killing 47 people, and leaked an estimated 1.5 million gallons of oil. On December 30th, 2013, the town of Castleton, North Dakota, which boasts producing 5 North Dakota governors, including the current one, roughly 30 miles west of Fargo, experienced shock waves 1 mile east of town. Another train carrying Bakken oil had derailed, and numerous cars exploded, sending a plume of jet black smoke and fire into the air. What would have happened if the train would have derailed in Castleton, a town of 2,400 people? What would have happened if it derailed in Fargo, a metro area with more than 100,000 people? Oil that leaves by rail must be certified that it's safe for transport. That means someone in North Dakota certified that the oil tankers traveling to Quebec and through Castleton were ready and safe for transportation. The Department of Transportation won 11 tankers. The same tankers involved in the Castleton mishap are not effective in preventing impact damage, according to the National Transportation Safety Board. In fact, they're so impact resistant you could take your deer rifle and shoot one of these suckers and it would explode. Anyway, while demand for oil has increased, pressuring oil companies, yeah, we'll need to laugh because it's getting serious. While demand for oil has increased, pressuring oil companies to drill deeper and search more widely for oil, the squeeze has mostly been felt by communities affected by the Bakken oil boom. In November of 2013, I traveled over 4,500 miles in 3 weeks, teaching creative writing in 13 communities affected by the Bakken oil boom. And so I got to bear witness to the widespread changes happening in the area. I'm originally from the western part of the state, the region known for producing coal. The changes I've noticed in infrastructure and community life are staggering. The first words my hotel concierge in Dickinson, the first town where I was teaching, were, "There are no good people here." George had come over from Russia to work in the oil fields to save money to pay for dental school. In Williston, North Dakota, I ate supper with Jim and Ida, 2 native Kansans who lost everything, their savings, retirement, and part of their parents' retirement accounts in the last economic recession. Jim was a state archaeologist and Ida worked in the school system. Struggling to provide for their 8-year-old daughter, Ida was able to get a job in the Williston public school system. Jim currently works for a local lumber yard. The 3 pay $1,200 a month plus utilities to live in a 28-foot motorhome in the middle of a man camp. Jim often spends the night at his friend's apartment so his family can have enough room in their trailer. $1,200 is actually a bargain in Williston. During my time in the region, I would see weekly specials for hotels, which are multiplying as fast as rabbits at the bargain rate of $700 a week. That's $2,800 a month. If you'd like to rent a house, you can expect to pay anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 a month in rent. That's $72,000 a year. Perhaps you'd like a cozy apartment. The most expensive place to rent an apartment in the country is not San Francisco or New York City. It's Williston, North Dakota, where a 700 square foot apartment will cost you roughly $2,000 a month. That's pretty fracking nuts. Dotted across the prairie of western North Dakota among whipping wheat, grazing cattle, and native prairie grasses are over 11,000 oil wells pumping and pulling shale oil to the surface. Flames flick and flash across the Bakken due to the flaring of natural gas. In October of 2013, the oil industry was flaring 29 to 30% of the natural gas. A year ago in April, the percentage climbed to 36%. And now, as the most recent report from the director of the Department of Mineral Resources, Lynn Helms, reports, we're flaring 26% natural gas. The irony of the report is this. It states, quote, U.S. natural gas storage is now 39% below the 5-year average, indicating increasing prices in the foreseeable future. North Dakota shallow gas exploration may be economic at future gas prices, end quote. Why are we wasting what might in the future become, actually already is, a viable energy resource? Something to help those of you who are not statistics majors like me. As you know, percentages can be misleading. They're not measuring it in total volume flared. So if we start with 8,000 oil wells and the percentage is very high, but the amount of wells increase, but the capture rate actually reduces it to, say, like 26%. So it lowers the percentage, the total amount flared is still greater because the number total of oil producing wells is climbing. So just to let you know, if you see, oh my, it's down to 20%, that doesn't necessarily mean business is improving and they're being more responsible. The land that's used for fracking in North Dakota is not only private land, but also public land you and I own. North Dakota holds some 1.1 million acres of the 3.8 million acres of national grassland, nearly 1/3 of the country's total amount of public grassland. But not many people view wild grassland as one of the gems of the prairie. In fact, most people view the prairie as wide open, expansive wasteland. Traveling to Crookston, Minnesota via train this past year, one woman said as we were passing through Whitefish, Montana, near the border of Glacier National Park, "Hurry and sit in the observation car, the rest of the trip is boring." Boring is how North Dakota is labeled. It takes time and patience to understand the prairie. As the writer and activist Terry Tempest Williams says, quote, "The degree to our awareness is the degree of our aliveness. What is invisible to me is what I have not yet learned how to see. The invisible becomes visible through our attention, through stillness, through silence, and patience," end quote. Are we being patient if the state of North Dakota has allowed oil exploration to happen on 95% of the national grasslands, protecting only 5%, or roughly 50,000 acres of it, from oil development? Fracking is a process that has increased our potential for oil extraction. Before, when we needed to hit the metaphorical nail on the head, we had to drill right above a pocket of oil. No more. We can now drill to the depth of 9,800 feet, where most of the Bakken shale oil resides, and drill horizontally nearly 2 miles, plunging and pressuring our way to new reservoirs of sweet Bakken crude. Fracking involves an initial blasting process of around 2 million gallons of fresh water, much of it coming from the Missouri River, with 1 to 2% of the water's composition, or about 22 to 44,000 gallons of it being made of chemicals. And this cocktail is shot into the Earth's crust, boring to the shale bed. After this process is complete, a pipe is plunged down the hole with a magical widget known as a whipstock that allows oil developers to then bend pipe horizontally into the shale bed. New reserves of fresh water must be used in the fracking process to help keep the pipeline clear of salt buildup due to the saliency of the water upon extraction. Like an artery that has too much plaque, fracking requires new medications of fresh water to stay healthy. Each well in the Bakken Formation requires 2.2 million gallons of fresh water to begin pulling oil, and if reports are correct that the boom could last 30 to 40 years, even with the drop of gas prices, that would mean each well's amount would increase to 6.6 to 8.8 million gallons of fresh water over the lifetime of each well. Second part of this longer essay, maybe more apropos to you. Oklahoma is a long drive from Central College. So far, while visiting classes at Central, I've encountered this question among students: what can we do? To come back to the title of this talk, and this is perhaps one of the riskiest ideas you can come to believe while you're in college, some of you might not want to know that you can do something about the Bakken oil boom. Many of us spend most of our time in college in comfortable classrooms, offices, and lounges, I know I do, dreaming up ideas and theories, reading books, and at religiously affiliated colleges, seeking our vocation. The word vocation comes from the Latin word vocare, which means to call. Here is my call to you. Help do something about the Bakken oil boom. If you're learning about systematic injustice towards women in a women's studies or anthropology course, head to Williston, North Dakota, where the underground sex trade is booming, specifically targeting 8 to 12-year-old girls. If you're studying biology and are concerned about the pollution of local watersheds, travel to the White Earth Valley and test the water of the White Earth River, which soaked in Steve Jensen's oil spill. If business is your strong suit, travel to Stanley, North Dakota, and suggest local companies practice the precautionary principle. The great thing about college is that this is the time to form habits and practices that'll stay with you throughout the rest of your lives. Now is the time to develop civil discourse and perhaps civil disobedience. Perhaps the most practical thing you as college students can do is raise awareness about the issue through the use of your bodies. No one has sat across gravel roads, linking arms, risking arrest in the attempts to stop semis from hauling dangerous fracking fluid and oil across North Dakota. No one, and this would be easy for you all to do tonight, has sat down across railroad tracks in Iowa, preventing the transportation of infamous bomb trains. A reminder, it's best to wait for the trains to be at a standstill before sitting. We don't want anyone getting hurt tonight. These are easy options available to young and old to help do something about the Bakken oil boom, to help stir a conversation, to let others know that they're not alone. But maybe this sounds too extremist, too out of step with the Reformed tradition. Here's what Wendell Berry said in a 2004 essay titled "Compromise Hell" in Orion magazine. We Americans are not usually thought to be a submissive people. Of course, we are. Why else would we allow our country to be destroyed? Why else would we be rewarding its destroyers? Why else would we all, by proxies we've given to greedy corporations and corrupt politicians, be participating in its destruction? Most of us are still too sane to piss in our own cistern, but we allow others to do so, and we reward them for it. We reward them so well, in fact, that those who piss in our cistern are wealthier than the rest of us. End quote. Perhaps your cistern has not yet been pissed in, but soon Central College will be visited by someone who's pissing throughout western North Dakota, Harold Ham. But first, before we get to Uncle Harry, a word of hope. The opportunity that's set before many of you at Central is to think deeply about the opportunities that you have. To whom much is given, much is expected. Continental Resources, where Harold Ham is the CEO, and other corporations will undoubtedly want to pluck up the bright minds of Central College students. It behooves you to take environmental ethics courses, study philosophy, read our great nature writers, converse with nonprofits that deal with victims of rape and drug trade in the Bakken, and reflect how a person could justify a job at a corporation such as Continental Resources. Now is the time where we must opt out rather than opt into corporate thinking. Back to Uncle Harry. Harold Ham, worth $12 billion, the CEO of Continental Resources, based in Oklahoma City, is coming to Central in 2 short weeks. Perhaps it's an opportunity for the college to receive a donation, for students to ask questions of one of the leading robber barons of the 21st century, or to learn the most ideal way to climb the corporate ladder. It's not unusual for colleges to bring wealthy men to college, but I do find it problematic that at college and in society as a whole, we celebrate men, because many of them are men, who make their money by unmaking the world. Worse though, as recent articles have reported, many of us should feel guilty for, or not feel guilty for using cars and our dependency on them. And so here's another little response. To suggest that those of us who drive cars, which I drove on my way down to Pella, shouldn't be ashamed of the damage inflicted upon the environment, read our home, is ludicrous. Here's a response to our desire to stay dependent upon the cheap energy of oil and coal. Third essay. Earth is warming and changing. This is common knowledge. Over the past 25 years, the Earth has warmed 1 degree Celsius, effectively winnowing glaciers and the polar ice caps. According to the United Nations Environment Program, quote, Earth is in the midst of a mass extinction of life. Scientists estimate that between 150 and 200 species of plant, insect, bird, and mammal become extinct every 24 hours. This is nearly 1,000 times the natural or background rate, and, say many biologists, is greater than anything the world has experienced since the vanishing of the dinosaurs nearly 65 million years ago, end quote. In 2013, Whole Foods demonstrated how dependent we are upon one single species, the honeybee. At its University Heights location in Rhode Island, Whole Foods eliminated 237 of their 453 products, or roughly 53% of what it sells, to show just how critical the honeybee is to producing food to our way of life. It makes sense from the assertion that roughly 150 to 200 of the known 8.7 million species become extinct every 24 hours, that we may very well face our own demise very soon. Bill McKibben's recent book, Oil and Honey, paints a similarly complex picture by focusing solely on plant life. For every degree Celsius that the Earth warms, plants must migrate 40 miles farther north. The average tree takes 10 years to move 1 mile farther north. For each degree Celsius the Earth warms, it will take plant life 400 years to acclimate to a new climate. With the prospect of the Earth warming 2 to 3 degrees Celsius this century, it means that we will need 800 to 1,200 years of time for plants to adequately adapt. Lately, I've been thinking about the idea of comfort in 21st century American society. From the moment we're born to the moment we die, we expect to be comfortable, and we'll do anything, including warming, weirding, and altering the biochemical and physical makeup of the planet to make it so. It took a lot of oil to get me here. It takes a lot of oil to get my clothes to the department store where I shop, as well as the produce I eat, and on and on and on. But we know oil does one thing. It does one thing very well. It warms the planet. The problem with easy out thinking, just because a person drives a car means she cannot critique the oil industry, is that it connotes a certain type of gag order. As Elie Wiesel, the Nobel laureate, said in the U.S. News and World Report on October 27, 1986, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. We have become indifferent to our home on this planet. Even worse, we've stayed complacent in our suits and comfortable offices, diluting rigorous thinking with apathy and complacency. You, dear students, must help change this. In America, we might replace the word comfort with a new one, the one that historian James J. Farrell calls comfort, spelled C-O-M-F-E-A-R-T-H. Comfort is the amount of comfort that's consistent with sustainability. It takes into consideration the needs of the planet we live and desperately depend upon. Comfort suggests that we might need to change the nature of our conversations to get more in line with the needs of nature. It suggests that we might need to put on another sweater in winter to stay warm, and sweat a little more in the summer. Comfort is how humans largely lived on the planet, but 250 years ago, with the Industrial Revolution, much of that changed. Now it seems that we have 500-year floods every other year, increased toxicity in the oceans, and new blazing pink sunsets in western North Dakota due to the flaring of methane and other gases. Comfort would mean we might rely more on the life-giving energy of the sun rather than the dead energy of fossil fuels. It would mean we might live more seasonably, realizing that citrus should not be available year-round. It would mean we might need to put greater demands upon ourselves rather than the earth as a whole. Conversations about fracking have been my way to earn a living over the last several months, teaching creative writing in the Bakken oil boom, lecturing across the country about things happening in western North Dakota, and traveling around North Dakota this past summer, spending time with people impacted by the rapidity of oil development in this country. In my travels, lectures, and writings, though, I've forgotten to factor in my own emotions. I've forgotten to look in the mirror and see how I feel about all of it, about the marred landscape of my childhood, the increased cost of living, and the underdeveloped infrastructure of North Dakota. I grew up in western North Dakota with the Badlands as my backbone and a creek as my afternoon babysitter. I spent time splashing in shallow pools, looking for clams, and sending fishing lures through the air like a track star hurling a shot put, praying that I would catch a fish. In my piscatorial adventures, I was being affected, and still am, by the land. Since I left North Dakota to pursue higher education, the Bakken oil boom has run rampant over the land of my childhood, the land I love. Pump jacks now bob up and down like chickens pecking at scratch. My anxiety grows as I drive past flares flicking in pastures, and I hold my breath as record number semis haul water, oil, fracking fluid, and filter socks on the highway, praying another accident doesn't happen. Flicking, though, isn't a quite accurate term to describe these flares. The flares in the Bakken are much larger and more intense than any bonfire you've experienced, ranging anywhere from 5 to 30 feet high. These flares contain toxic fumes, roaring sounds, intense heat that creates health concerns for both people and wildlife, not to mention the waste of a precious resource, natural gas. Last December, Salon reported that a study on Canada's Inuit population had been released. The study revealed that the environment deeply shapes who we are and affects our mental well-being. And with the changing world and increasing climate catastrophes, anxiety and depression are on the rise. I see it in many of your faces right now. Quote, being trapped indoors made some people feel cut off from themselves and their identities. It's like taking part of your arm away, one man said. There is just really something missing. Ashley Consolo Wilcox, a Canadian research chair at Cape Breton University, who's helping lead the first ever studies that measure how rising global temperatures affect the well-being of Canada's Inuit population. Her team heard variations of this statement over and over again, that people physically identified with the natural world surrounding them, and maybe you do about Iowa as well. They didn't so much consider themselves as being from Nunavut as literally of it. I empathize with the Inuits, badlands that have been shaped and formed over millions of years by the leftovers of the Rocky Mountains, which shaped and formed my own thinking, have now been leveled in the name of industrial progress. Theodore Roosevelt National Park is no longer a serene place. Now there are flares flicking on the horizon, and the ability to find a stream that's not been subjected to an oil or saltwater spill is becoming more difficult in western North Dakota. And yet I wonder if I'm a voice crying in the wilderness. A family member who lives out of state, who's not traveled through the Bakken, does not believe a word I put in print. Here are some statistics for you to take home tonight. There have been over 9,000 oil spills in the last 8 years of this boom. On average, one person is killed per day in an automobile accident related to the Bakken. Bakken oil has killed 47 people in Quebec. Pronghorn antelope have not had a hunting season in western North Dakota in the last 8 years due to impacts from the oil boom. In April of last year, 36% of natural gas was flared off in the Bakken. The entirety of these oil spills in the Bakken empties into the Lake Sakakawea and Missouri River watershed. Perhaps more than all of this is the fact that the Bakken oil boom continues to push global climate change at an alarming rate. To observe this, you can now look at a picture of the country at night and see western North Dakota on fire due to flaring. All of this, to my mind, is not progress. It's a rudimentary and crude type of development, and it should be called so. We should not praise fracking for ensuring us a fractured planet, an economy that will have to continue dealing with environmental mishaps and new waves of unnatural disasters. Fracking, to my mind, is not the hallmark of human achievement. Things like artwork by Da Vinci, civil disobedience by Gandhi, symphonies by Beethoven, and good urban planning are. As we continue to push aside progressive policies that would help make it easier for us to be good, such as subsidizing organic food, creating higher standards for fuel efficiency, transporting more material by rail since it's more efficient than transporting by semis, investing in local economies and infrastructures rather than continuing the corporatocracy of American politics, we continue to see how our freedom is dwindling. When we invest in corporations like Continental Resources, Enbridge, Halliburton, and Tesoro, we lose our agency in helping create meaningful change for ourselves and for future generations. The Bakken boom's progression and development also highlights a new type of terrorism. Only this terrorism knows no creed, national bounds, or language other than the language of the bottom line. This terrorism does not look like a particular sect of people, but instead uses the invisible hand of the supposedly free market to do its bidding. This type of terrorism creates a stupidity that lives in the here and now, rather than investing in the long view that would create a stable, reliable, and environmentally sound economy. The terrorism executed by corporate America, which only asks that we sacrifice our humanity and intelligence in its name. While many of us are distracted by the terrorism abroad, we forget to look at the terrorism in our backyard. Terrorism brought on by the loss in topsoil, by increasing monocultures susceptible to diseases, increasing planned obsolescence, which promotes the purchase of shoddy-made gadgets and gizmos. This type of terrorism paralyzes us in our own regions, our homes, and allows us to believe that we cannot do anything about the corporatocracy plaguing the land. This terrorism comes through in the form of donations that create gag orders upon young, educated minds, fuels research that feeds wealthy pocketbooks, and requires us to practice lazy thinking. The great American thinker and writer John Muir said, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything in the universe." This sentiment has stuck in my mind like a piece of coal candy. The Missouri River, which is surrounded by the Bakken oil boom, shaped the contours of my young heart and mind. It held stories of Lewis and Clark, Sacagawea and her son Pomp. It is where my grandfather took me fishing and where I caught tadpoles and pools on sandbars. It's the original highway that transported me and my dreams of faraway places and showed me my place in the family of things. I still believe in the story of the Missouri River and the story of western North Dakota, a landscape that formed and shaped the 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt. But I worry that the story of this place and my place in this story is taking a drastic turn away from childhood wonderment as being replaced by adulthood fear. In my gathering of stories and spending time with new friends, I've listened to harrowing tales of well water ruined and turned black while washing apples. I've listened to couples eagerly looking forward to retirement who've had to move due to flares being within 500 feet of their homes. I've sat with farmers who have wept over salt water spilled on their prided and preserved native prairie grass. I've listened to pastors lament their inability to preach the good news in the midst of environmental destruction. Now the Bakken oil boom, through the Dakota Access Pipeline, seeks to make its way across two major water highways, the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, as well as 8 major watersheds in Iowa. But the story can always change, and by sharing stories, we can strengthen our communities, build resolve, and seek a new way of doing business. The piggish politics pushed by corporate America can be stopped. It's just up to us to elect new leaders. New laws and new economics can bring better practices and management to how North Dakota and the country do business. and listening to stories of neighbors, of friends, of great writers like Terry Tempest Williams, Edward Abbey, Rick Bass, and Wallace Stegner can create pockets of hope where the land is on fire, if we take them seriously. I believe in the power of stories. It's my hope that America will start to tell a new story, one where we took a conscious stance to say no to coal and oil development in honor of preserving the planet, all while providing enough for each family, making it easier for each one of us to be good. Thank you.
So Taylor's got some time for questions and for conversation.
Or anger, or whatever.
anger.
Yeah, we can start over here and go to the back.
Tears. Yeah.
I was just curious, in your time in western North Dakota, have they noticed any abnormal seismic activity?
So seismic activity has actually gone up. There's a monthly report that comes out through the Department of Mineral Resources, and each month that number changes. That doesn't mean, we're sitting here and doing our affiliateship, but it does mean that the composition of earthen levels is shifting. So there is some notice of that, which we don't fully know what that will mean yet.
Yeah, I was just curious because I'm from Colorado, and my town, they're fracking for natural gas, and we haven't had an earthquake since 1850, and we've had 3 in the past year.
And there have been, before we used to worry that there was a lot of this greenwashing or whatever you want to say of fracking, that, fracking causes earthquakes. But actually within the last year, and you can ask Harold when he comes, Oklahoma has had more earthquakes than California has, and by several times the normal amount. And as you know, Oklahoma doesn't sit on a continental shelf that should be having earthquakes. So there is noticeable seismic activity in terms of deep underground. Yes, in the back.
You talked about the flares and the fumes that come off of them. How far do those fumes spread out?
So this is studied by Canadian scientists, so I can give you in kilometers. It's about 4 to 7 kilometers, which covers, here is where a fairly large Native American reservation is, the Fort Berthold Reservation. They're flaring huge amounts there, about 60 to 90% of natural gas is flared. But at no one point when you're driving on the highway can you get out of view of one of these flares, which largely to my mind means we're blanketing a huge population and known cancer-causing agents. So, yeah. Other questions? Yes?
Why are people flaring some of the...
It's a great question.
Why would you flare?
So compared to Colorado or in the Marcellus development in Pennsylvania where we're fracking for natural gas, in North Dakota where the priority is oil. And as current market values dictate, oil's about 13 times more valuable than natural gas. They have not implemented technology or slowed down is really the other compounding factor here to capture it with 100% retention rate. So it implies that market economic principles are designed as such that roughly, depending on fluctuating oil and natural gas values, we're flaring about $70 to $100 million a month in terms of natural gas just up into the air. And so it means we can afford to burn roughly around $1 billion worth of product and still come out very well at the end of it. So it's a simple way of how we measure cost and true cost of these things. And I see that your furrowed brow, and that's why, yeah, my brow's furrowed too, because logically it would not make sense. So, but that's the best standard answer I can give you of why we're doing that here in the middle.
How do you feel about fracking versus other methods of extracting oil? Because I know one argument for fracking is that it's better than other ways, and I really have also no idea what you guys.
Yeah, I guess I don't even entertain it because extractive economies to me are so 20th century. In the 21st century, we need to treat the planet uncharacteristically good. So to me, the conversation doesn't even enter is fracking as bad as this. Well, if you were in my class and you know, were not handing in 26% of the products that I required, you'd effectively have to take my class again. I mean, we demand better of you, right, in college. I would hope a 74% is not a good grade in your mind, but that's the average grade of the Bakken boom. How I've seen it, so we know, right, that fracking, that coal is a very dirty type of energy. We're phasing out of coal slowly, very slowly. Like at ISU, we're finally getting in compliance with 1990 legislation next year to switch to natural gas. But to me, all of this enters this, and it runs along the western border of this state. So is it better or worse? I can't adequately say because it's bad. I mean, it's not is it better or worse, it's that we're literally flaring a huge amount of natural gas into the air, which maybe if we weren't doing that, we could hypothetically say, well, it's not as bad as coal. But right now, when you're literally removing a 400 million year old layer of earth 9,800 feet below the surface of the ground, we have no concept yet of what that fully does to the water table. Over years, how will that slowly start to settle and shift? And what will that do to the flow of water here? I mean, to me, something that's morally reprehensible that in the conversation of is it not as good or bad, 6,000 people here couldn't drink their water because of pipeline burst. No one protested that. So in the conversation, what I call the conversation we're not having, because I'm assuming before tonight, many of you didn't know certain things about this boom. It's just bad, so why do it? There's certain jobs in the oil field where when you're checking oil coming into oil drums, you have to wear monitors on your helmet to tell you the toxicity of the fumes in the tank. And there have been 10 known deaths of that because of the malfunction of this gizmo. As soon as you open it, it kills you instantly if that level is too high. So if your little widget doesn't work properly, once that thing opens, you have no getting away from it. So we put people in jobs like that. You got me really going on tangent, Josh, and then in the back.
I think another way of, maybe you can comment on whether you agree with this or not.
Sure.
But one way of thinking about pipelines especially is that those create a kind of sunk cost infrastructure that often is maintained or defended or attempts are made to preserve it for decades.
Right.
And so if we're really trying to transition to alternative energy sources like solar or wind,
Right.
If you build a pipeline, you're making a decade-long commitment
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
that kind of
Right.
energy source.
It is a type of marriage, that's correct. I mean, the pipeline that leaked here was about 60 years old. And so inevitably, all these pipelines, will not be maintained to the level that's satisfactory. And in my father's a union worker, and so it's interesting in the context of what's happening in Iowa. It's not to me that work that's done to prepare pipelines is shoddy work. It's that we don't maintain pipelines over the life of these structures. It's not criticizing someone's creation of a product, it's our long-term marriage of that product and when that eventually will leak. In the back.
So we know that fracking is obviously bad. What do you recommend that how we get our energy from? What methods would be
Yeah. Well, the sun's largely how we've gotten it for a long time, but we've somehow forgotten it. I mean, I think one of the best solar-powered things you have is your body. A bicycle is a great solar-powered way of getting around. All it requires is the food that you and I eat to power it. The question is a comprehensive one because it gets into urban design. The city of Pella is not designed well. I'm sorry to critique Pella, I love it so far, I love the canal, and I want to come back for the Tulip Festival. But the way we have designed cities is to favor automobiles. And we know automobiles are not what we need more of. We in fact need less of them. So there are decisions that you and I never got to make because they were made a long time ago that we've had to live into now. So if not fracking, what would that look like? It would look a lot more beautiful is maybe the first comment, and a lot more creative. This is very uncreative to me. It would mean you would actually design communities to be efficient. It would mean that homes would use passive energy to heat them. One of the buildings I've been talking about with faculty, and we can talk more about this later, this is like a whole separate lecture, but there's a great building in Seattle called the Bullitt Center, B-U-L-L-I-T-T. And here I've been so impressed with your LEED certification buildings, but it makes LEED look like a 2-year-old. I mean, it looks like the easiest thing. The Bullitt Center is actually the planet's first known living building, which is a building that's constructed based on the bioregion it inhabits. So a building in Pella, Iowa would look different than the one in Seattle, but it has all solar panels on top. It collects rainwater, and that rainwater is filtered on site and becomes your drinking water as compostable waste toilets. It's also designed like this building would not be up to snuff for a living build. Well, maybe there's a, oh, there is a window in the back, okay. But the concept is that no place should you be farther than 30 feet away from light, not only so that the light can get to you, but that you can get to the light. I mean, think of any of you who've worked in cubicles and offices, or maybe very well might in the future. This would revolutionize our relationship both to the natural world, and we can talk more later. Yes?
With the pipeline coming basically right through our backyard, what are organizations around here doing to either prevent it or
Sure.
make sure there's organizations that
There is, yes.
What can we do
Sure.
as students and community members? And then before you answer that, I'd also
Okay.
like to plug this February, there'll be 2 meetings, one in Pella and one in Knoxville, that the community members will be asked to delegate how funds will be used to put in future bike trails. So if you'd like to decide what our infrastructure will look like in the future, show up to one of those meetings. You can definitely ask me about times and places in the future, and I'll let you know. But
That's so good. So this is sort of a controversial name, I guess, for a website. Let's see if it loads. We might not have an adequate connection, but anyway, you can go here to sort of get some ideas of what you can do. Bakken.com. There's the Iowa Utilities Board. Oh, look, there I am. You didn't know it was a plug for me. We could get that away now. We can find something less user friendly, like the Earth on Fire. The Bakken.com is a good sort of starting point. There's a triumvirate, the Iowa Utilities Board, which will be the sole governing body that will either say yay or nay to this pipeline. It is 3 individuals. And so right now is their open commenting period for about the next 3 months. And so whether you're for or you're against this pipeline, it sort of behooves us to be making these comments, and you can submit more than one comment if you like. Like I said in class today, you could have a party where you all take shots of espresso and then write your letters to the Iowa Utilities Board as a group. You know, that can be sort of your bonding experience for the early morning before class. But that is literally sort of where we're at right now in the moment, other than having conversations with your friends and that way. Yes?
One of our community partners wrote to me today to tell me about a public walk he's taking.
Oh yeah, at Fallon. Yeah.
So he would invite students. He's going to come. The pipe. This proposed route is very near us.
Yes.
And he's going to walk that, and you'll have an opportunity if you want to be in touch with him. Let me know, and I will connect you electronically because he would love to have some central students involved in that confrontational strategy.
Mhm. Yeah, he's doing a walk of the entire proposed pipeline, where it would run through Iowa. It's an incredible perspective he'll have at the end of this walk.
Look, you know, he led the march across the whole country, so
Yeah.
climate change.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, he's a very inspiring man. Other questions? Yes?
Do you have an opinion on Toyota's new hydrogen fuel cell car?
I'm sure I do. I actually don't own a car, is the thing, because I live in Ames where it's convenient not to own one. We have good public transportation, so if you're looking, later we can talk, I can make car recommendations, I guess, but I'm sort of so outdated where I don't own a car, so I'm sorry to not give you a more straightforward answer. Yes.
Kind of going off of that, what do you think of hydrogen as an alternative energy source?
Well, we saw what the Hindenburg looked like, and it just makes me skeptical. I mean, yeah, like that's how I feel about it. Yeah, that's sort of it. Yeah. Yes.
Another thing going on like pipelines, there's also like I think in northern Iowa a line for solar or wind energy. There's gonna be like an electricity line.
Yeah.
There's like an uproar about that too.
Yeah, that's right. There's one a little farther north here. Yeah, there is some controversy. That's correct to put it that way about it.
Yeah, even though it's a renewable resource, they're not sure what
Right.
high voltage lines in your backyard are gonna do.
Right,
So-
right. And we also haven't developed renewable technology enough where, you know, like a wind grid cannot necessarily, like we can't have wind farms over in Nebraska that are powering Chicago yet. But maybe that's also being more of a local thing. I think there's certain things as a country that are good to think comprehensively as large groups of people that we should be pushing and lobbying for. There are also great opportunities locally of what you can be doing here. Your college is already doing some of those great things, to have a garden on campus, to have LEED certification happening. To just increase those conversations is never a bad thing. I know if you're Dutch, that might be near enough to Norway where you're sort of scary of, you know, getting to know each other, but I encourage you to do more of that. Sorry, yes.
So have you, I don't know if you have been in North Dakota in the last several months, but has the drop in oil prices had a significant impact on business as usual in North Dakota?
It's created some interesting things. I have not been there since the plunge. I was last there in August, so not recently. But it has sort of gone a ripple effect. But a Canadian economist that I'm in touch with, David Hynre, H-Y-N-R-E, the price would have to stay such where it is currently for the next 6 months before things would actually start even shifting. So right now, what are they saying? Halliburton is saying, well, it'll lay off 7,000 people. The conversation, at least with friends I have in the region, they're talking that the boom would do a temporary bust. But you know, there's not one mega corporation here. It's not a massive company town, but that it would hypothetically bust for about 18 months, and then we'd wait for the Saudis to leave us alone as the price would come up, and then business would resume. Because the previous oil boom, there have been 2 in North Dakota, but in the 80s, there was the late 70s and early 80s, there was a previous oil boom, and then it busted, mainly because that's when we had to drill straight up and down, and they knew there was more oil there, and just waiting for technology to increase. So some engineer who probably owns half of Bermuda now developed the whipstock, a very simple thing that over several hundred feet shifts it horizontally. So instead of drilling to the pocket of oil, you can now find where the oil is and shift to that whole level of the earth where it resides. So right now, as long as we're continuing, which is ironic, today is National Divestment Day, if you didn't know this at your college campus. We know there's more oil there. So I think it will just be a matter of when that price comes back to see what will happen there. Yeah. Yes,
Can you say a little bit about what happens to a rural infrastructure in a boom? kind of bust economy. You hinted at this with the trafficking
Yeah.
that's increased. The New York Times has reported on increased drug use, increased
Right.
homicide.
Right.
What's the impact on families? When
Yeah.
we're thinking about sustainability, it's not just the environmental concerns,
Right.
but the economic and the social.
Right.
Can you flesh out more of the social?
Yeah, the one perk, I should say one good thing about the boom, the gym I used in Dickinson this summer, I was like a minority there. You know, there were people from all over the world that do not look like the typical North Dakotan does. And that way it's an interesting shift in what's happening to the homogeny of that region, which I think is never a bad thing to get to know some new people. But your question's a good one because it's not only drug trade and sex trafficking, but some of the questions I even have, like Williston, pre-boom was about 16,000 and now is over 40,000 in 8 years. A small town, Watford City, pre-boom was 1,500 and now, and this number might not seem big, but in 8 years is 8,000. It implies that every 2 years the town has doubled in size. It would be as if Pella over 8 years doubled every 2 years in size, which means what happens to your city structures in terms of schools, your nurses, who's coming there to work? I mean, people that I was able to spend some time with, people who work as EMTs, are hugely overworked. Normally, if you're an EMT and you go out on the ambulance, you're supposed to have a long rest period afterwards because you've gone through a very traumatic, high-intensity period. But they would normally send people right back out because the infrastructure in terms of even EMTs is so low. So there's the risk of not knowing your neighbor, but there's also the risk of your community not literally having the amenities that are basic needs to you to be met. Doctors, nurses, social workers, therapists hardly exist in this region, because I'm sure, I mean, if you go to Walmart in Williston, I call it the seventh circle of hell, you can just feel tension there. So I think that there's the allure of some of this, like what I really came to tell you all is to drop out of Central and go to Williston where you can make $17 an hour at Walmart. But $17 an hour in Walmart is about minimum wage anyplace else, because how will you afford your $2,000 a month apartment? Or you get to live in a man camp with a guy named Tiny who's not so tiny. But I think there is the larger implication. There's the environmental concern, but there's also what happens when you cram so many people into a bottle, and bottlenecking starts happening into communities that aren't given time to grow. And then also when the boom busts, because we work in boom economics, there will always be a bust. What happens when that starts to shrink and hotels stand empty, or schools stand empty, or nurses move away? This is an area that, I mean, this is the story of the American West. You know, boom and bust over and over. And so once this happens, we haven't had a boom like this before, and I think the potential shrink could be quite scary, and then I think the longer term studies of the area that would finally have time to happen could be quite revealing about what we've brought to ourselves. So, yeah, good question though. I'll think a little bit more too. Anything else? Well, I don't need to take up more of your time, but I'm happy to talk afterwards too. And there are cookies or coffee.
That's right, there's plenty more. So thanks, Taylor.
Thank you.
Pretty good, how about you?